Dzień dobry. Czy jesteśmy świadkami końca Europy, czy też Europa po prostu nam na naszych oczach i z naszym udziałem dojrzewa? Porozmawiam za chwilę o tym z naszym gościem. Dzień dobry, kłania się Zbigniew Bartuś. Jesteśmy na Europejskim Forum Nowych Idei w Sopocie, a w studiu Dziennika Gazety Prawnej i Szkoły Głównej Handlowej gości profesor Loukas Tsoukalis, ekonomista, prezes Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy. Good morning, Mr. Professor.
Good morning.
It's great to have you in our studio. So, you've got a year of Euro enthusiasts in power in Poland. But let's talk about your book, Europe's Coming of Age. In this book, you have drawn on a lifetime of scholarship on European integration to argue that the European Union can exert a moderating influence in a world of polarized great powers. Why only moderating influence, and in which areas the influence is really possible?
Yeah, the book, if I may say so, is based not only on analysis, but also on experience. Because I've been directly involved in Brussels. I was special advisor to presidents.
So you're an insider.
Yeah, of both the Commission and the Council. And I try to look at the bigger picture instead of looking at bits and pieces. And my conclusion is that unless Europe becomes a political adult by undertaking a role in terms of foreign policy, in terms of industrial policy, in terms of technology and so on, the risk, and it's a very high risk, is that Europe will be marginalized. And
by whom?
Will be marginalized in a rapidly changing world, dominated increasingly by two superpowers, but also with the emergence of other middle powers. And if we are marginalized, we will be unable to defend basic fundamental interests and values. And that is really what is at stake today.
So what are the fundamental
fundamental interests and values are democracy, individual rights, our prosperity, our privacy. You see, in a world, for example, of technological revolution, in which technological platforms can control data and have access to your private life, the capacity to regulate them is something that depends on Brussels and not on individual states. And as individual states, we do not have the bargaining power to deal either with China or with Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. And that is a key message that I'm trying to get across. I think we are at a point, we are living through the end of an era in the world. The world is changing very rapidly, and it's also becoming an increasingly threatening world. And it's not only Russia. Because, of course, you in Poland are aware, and of course I fully understand it, you're aware of the Russian threat and what happens next to you in Ukraine. But there's another war. There's another war in the Middle East.
Yes.
And that war is very dangerous as well. And for example, the country I come from, Greece is closer to Gaza than it is to Ukraine geographically. And there are two wars which are representative of not only a rapidly changing world, but also a world in which the former superpower loses its control. I mean, look what is happening in relations between the United States and Israel.
What should we do with China in this new world?
China presents both opportunities and threats. Opportunities because China is a very big market. China is very important in terms of technology. It's no longer a country that relies on cheap labor. It relies increasingly on high technology and an extremely well-educated workforce.
Half of robots in the world were installed in China last year.
And they made a change which is not only remarkable, but has no precedent in world history. I mean, turning an impoverished, underdeveloped country in 40 years into a rising superpower and a technological superpower is something that has to be admired. But we know that it is a country also where the state plays a very important role, where individual freedoms are not there, I mean, all those things are taken for granted. So China for us is a market, is also a partner.
Maybe
if
a
we
partner,
want,
yes.
we have to have it as a partner if we want to address climate change, for example.
Yes.
It's Europe, America, and China that represent more than 50% of emissions
Yes.
in the world. So you have to cooperate with China. At the same time, it is a rival. And we have to draw the line and find the optimum between all those representations of China in the world. I fear that sometimes in the United States, they tend to over-concentrate on one, which is rivalry, and they forget the others. And that's what I mean also by the moderating role of Europe in world affairs. We Europeans, or most Europeans, do not divide the world simply into goodies and baddies. We have experience. We've been around for many centuries running global affairs. So, and this moderating influence is absolutely necessary, because I believe that at the present moment, world peace is at stake. And it is related not only to Russia and Ukraine, but is also related to what happens in the Middle East, not to mention US and China.
Yeah. We are in the Central Europe, in Poland, with its ambitions, of course. We are after 1 year of change. So have you heard the slogan, Poland's back? Yes. So we are 1 year after the comeback. So, but after this 1 year, it turned out that the Euro enthusiasts who defeated the Euro skeptics in the election are not the supporters of the integration, wider and deeper integration in this model thought out in Brussels and in fact in Germany and France. So is it because the Polish government is the hostage of the populists?
Well, allow me to make a few comments about Poland as a foreigner. And of course, I hope you forgive my relative ignorance on some things. The country is divided. It is a polarized society to a large extent, similar to what is happening in the US. The US is the epitome of political polarization. The task of the present government is not an easy one, because first of all, it has to undo some of the mechanisms set up for 8 years before, and that's not easy if you want to play by the democratic rules and the democratic book. So I can understand the constraints. But at the same time, it has to deliver the goods to the population, because otherwise people are disappointed. They say, you know, you've been telling us all sorts of things and nothing happens. So it's a very difficult course, and at a time when you have a war next to your border. So the populist...
And we are part of the war.
Yeah.
In fact, we are the part of the war as the Western state.
Absolutely. So it's a difficult task. The populist threat is a very real one. But allow me to say just one thing. Populists do not grow out of nowhere. Populists are there when there is a fertile ground. And a fertile ground means, for example, a large section of the population which may be deeply disappointed. They feel that they are out of the political game, where in a world where there may be too many inequalities, so those who are on the bottom feel they are forgotten, they are left over, and they turn to anybody who will promise them quick change.
Quick change and the control, maybe?
And control. And Poland has inequalities, considerable ones. I mean, there are other countries that have even worse. I know it's a difficult task, but I very much hope that this is something that the government wins, because if it doesn't, if the populists come back in Poland, and they're already in power in several European countries and rising, then it's going to be a very bleak picture in Europe. And allow me to add something else, and this is, if Mr. Trump is re-elected in the United States, the balance of power inside Europe will change, because all the right-wing populists will have a reference point on the other side of the Atlantic.
And the supporter, maybe.
And it will be a strong reference point. I mean, just to give you an example, listening to the debate between Kamala Harris and Mr. Trump, there was one point that was revealing. she said that I hear from people that you are not taken seriously by political leaders all over the world. And Trump's answer was, no, Mr. Orban tells me that I'm a great leader. So he uses the example of a prime minister in Europe who is an outcast inside Europe. And this is the argument he uses to tell us how important and how popular he is.
Yeah.
And that shows it is really the epitome of the problem in US-European relations if Mr. Trump comes to power.
My last question is a little bit dramatic. Is alternative für Deutschland an alternative, real alternative for the European integration? What do you think? Because this is not the only party in Europe which thinks about de-integration. So
yeah, and the clear answer is no. These people are not only populists, but they are nationalists. And they pretend that you can find solutions to the problem of prosperity, technological lagging behind in Europe and all the rest at the nation state, which is absolute nonsense. I mean, the idea today that nation states, even of the size of Germany, can deliver answers to those problems on their own by closing borders is beyond nonsense. It makes no sense at all. But unfortunately, they address themselves to people who feel, as I said before, left out of the political game. And immigration is major symbol and a flag. And I believe that immigration is an issue that we have to address very seriously. And I see that your government here in Poland is trying to deal with this. Because on the one hand, because of demographics, we need a constant inflow of immigrants every year. Because European population is declining in numbers and is aging. On the other hand, we need to control that immigration. Because if we do not control the immigration, the fascists will be in power.
okay.
And we have to recognize this as a real problem and address it.
So our choice is integration or the collapse of the Western world?
The collapse of Europe.
Of Europe.
The collapse of Europe, for
Europe. The European era.
That's
So
right.
no, Europe's coming of age, Europe's collapse. Yes,
I hope
this is
we're
our
not going to
choice.
see that.
I hope so. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you for inviting me.
Moim gościem był Loukas Tsoukalis, ekonomista, prezes Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy. Dziękuję za uwagę.